Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something pretty complex and honestly often surprising. We're talking about inappropriate relationships between educators and students.
Yeah, and it's especially relevant now because digital evidence, things found on phones and computers, it's not just a small part of these cases anymore. It's often right at the center.
Exactly. And this really hits hard because it's about the huge amount of trust we all put in educators, parents, communities, everyone.
It is. And when that trust gets broken so badly, the stakes are incredibly high. It's not just about the people directly involved. It really shakes the foundation of safety and integrity in our schools.
That's exactly why we're diving in today. Our mission here is to walk you through some specific, very recent cases, look at the tricky legal stuff around them, and also get a handle on the bigger picture, the societal context, the digital side of things.
Right. The idea is to give you those crucial insights, maybe a few aha moments so you can really grasp what's going on. It's an unsettling picture for sure.
Okay, let's jump right in. First stop, Michigan. We're looking at Jocelyn Sanderman. She's 26, a former teacher at Oakside Prep Academy in Waterford Township. She's accused of a sexual relationship with a 16-year-old boy back in 2023, facing 3 counts of third-degree criminal sexual conduct.
Okay.
But here's the really striking part, how this alleged relationship supposedly came out. Apparently, Sanderman confided in another teacher.
Wow.
Yeah, and that teacher then went to the police, made that really difficult decision.
That's huge. It really speaks to the importance of, people doing the right thing within that school community. Yeah. Oakland County prosecutor Karen McDonald, she used to be a teacher herself. Actually, she put out a really strong statement.
Oh, yeah.
Called it the ultimate breach of trust. And she specifically praised that teacher who came forward, saying it was vital for protecting other kids.
Makes sense.
And kind of ironically, the school, Oakside Prep, really emphasizes this moral focus program they have. So it adds another layer to the whole thing.
Absolutely. And the potential consequences for Sanderman, they're serious. Up to 15 years in prison for each count if she's convicted. That's potentially 45 years.
Huge stakes.
Okay, so moving from Michigan, let's look at an Illinois case. Christina Formella. This one really shows how digital evidence and changing stories play out. She was a special education teacher accused of an inappropriate relationship with a 15-year-old student.
Right. I remember reading about this one. The details are pretty intricate.
They really are. Her arrest, March 16th, 2025, it was caught on body cam. She seemed totally surprised, distressed, like hyperventilating, saying she felt sick.
Yeah.
And her husband, Michael, he was there too. His reaction was, well, odd. He just asked the police, is she going somewhere? Kind of detached.
That body cam footage is chilling. And, there's been a lot of public chatter about her husband Michael's support. Yeah. Especially since they only got married in August 2024.
Right.
And the alleged abuse apparently started just a few months after that, back in December 2023. That timeline definitely makes people ask questions.
Understandably. The charges are serious too. Felony criminal sexual assault, plus 2 counts of aggravated criminal sexual assault.
And aggravated here usually means there's an abuse of a position of trust or authority. Right.
Exactly. Which is key because the victim wasn't just her student, he was also her tutor, and she coached his soccer team. So multiple positions of trust allegedly exploited.
That really amplifies the severity, and the potential prison time reflects that.
Yeah.
Criminal sexual assault, you're looking at maybe 4 to 15 years, and you have to serve 85% of that.
Wow.
Yeah. And the aggravated counts, maybe 3 to 15 years, serving 50%. So these are really substantial penalties.
So the big break in the investigation, how did that happen?
Well, this is where the digital side comes in strong. The student got a new phone.
Okay.
And his mother was able to access his cloud account, his backup. And that's where she found them loads of incriminating text messages between him and Christina.
And these weren't ambiguous messages, were they?
Not at all. Shockingly explicit. The student was calling her mama, saying things like, I love you so much, mama.
Right. And her replies.
Just as explicit, I love you so much, baby. And then, really damningly, I love having sex with you.
Oof. That just cuts through any possible defense of it being like a mentorship or something innocent.
Completely. Language like that. It just dismantles any other explanation you could possibly try to construct. It's incredibly direct evidence.
And then you have Christina's story, which changed a lot.
Right. Initially, she tells the police she kept these private notes, but they were just for her anxiety. And any mention of sex in them, that was supposedly about her husband.
Okay, plausible deniability attempt, number 1.
Exactly. But then, later, her story flips entirely. She starts claiming the student actually hacked her phone and was trying to blackmail her.
That's a huge shift.
A massive shift. And legally speaking, when your story changes that dramatically, especially in a self-serving way, it immediately raises serious doubts about your credibility. Juries, judges.
Yeah.
They look at that very skeptically.
And those private notes she mentioned, they ended up being pretty revealing, but not in the way she probably intended.
No, they almost became a self-indictment. You see her writing things like, "You're so effing predictable and disgusting, shocker, you cheated on me with her," trying to paint herself as the victim of his infidelity.
Right, and trying to frame herself as the one ending it. Like, I initiated every single breakup only for you to end things, saying you couldn't get over it. You've ruined us. Even accusing him of gaslighting.
Mm-hmm. You gaslit me and convinced me it was fine every single time. It's this attempt to build an alternative narrative.
But it kind of backfires, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Because these kinds of self-serving narratives, especially when they're trying so hard to shift blame, often contain contradictions that end up being powerful evidence against the person writing them.
Like what?
Well, she wrote, "I'm effing mad that I let a 16-year-old F with me like that." That's pure blame shifting. But then you find these other notes like manifestations notes from November 2024.
Manifestations note.
Yeah, things like, "Blank student's name and I will connect again soon in a positive way. We will be able to love each other while also living our own lives." That directly contradicts her claim she was being stalked or framed. It actually suggests she wanted a future connection.
Wow. That really undermines her defense.
Completely. And then there are other details, right? She apparently never reported this supposed stalking to the school or to the student's mother.
Good point. You'd think she would if it were real.
Exactly. Plus, they found topless photos of the student on her phone. And people reported she'd just randomly bring him up in conversations. It all points away from her story.
So the evidence seems pretty strong.
Yeah, a legal expert covering the case called the evidence remarkable. And her excuses borderline laughable. And they made the point clearly. These relationships are fundamentally child abuse, period. That's how the legal system views it.
Okay, let's shift gears to Texas now. Darian Rogers, she's 22, a student teacher at Rouse High School, accused of an improper relationship with a 17-year-old student.
Right, and this one has a twist.
Yeah, the dual relationship. The student also worked with Rogers at H-E-B, a local grocery chain. And that's where the alleged acts actually happened, not at the school.
Which complicates things slightly. But the investigation didn't start with the victim here either, did it?
No, it started when another student at Rouse High reported knowing about an inappropriate relationship.
And this student added more context, claiming Rogers, who was also their boss at H-E-B, was allegedly involved with several co-workers from the store who were also students in the Leander School District.
Suggesting a potential pattern right away.
Exactly. That immediately changes the scope from a possible one-off incident to something potentially systemic for her.
And the digital evidence popped up fast here, too, a voicemail.
From Rogers herself.
Yep. Allegedly admitting she sent explicit photos to the 17-year-old male student.
Wow. That's direct.
Yeah.
And it shows again how digital evidence just cuts through the denials. Because the student initially denied it, right?
He did. And Rogers tried to frame it as a big sister and little brother thing.
Yeah, the classic minimization attempt.
But then came the texts about the Plan B pill, the emergency contraceptive.
Ah, hard to explain that away in a sibling dynamic.
Right. Once confronted with those texts, Rogers apparently admitted to having sex with a student. The digital trail just boxed her in.
It really leaves very little wiggle room. What you say verbally can be completely undone by what's on your phone.
And it got worse. They did a forensic copy of her phone.
And found more.
Oh, yeah. A text message she sent before she even started student teaching at Rouse, warning the same student not to make inappropriate comments around school staff, shows premeditation almost.
That suggests awareness of the inappropriateness even before she officially had that teacher authority.
And then a video of her taking the Plan B pill.
She recorded herself.
Recorded herself taking it, sent the video to the student along with a screenshot of the receipt for the pill.
That is remarkable evidence. Talk about leaving a digital footprint. It's almost unbelievable someone would document that.
It really underscores how powerful electronic evidence is now. Everything can leave a trace.
No kidding. There's almost nowhere to hide if the digital records exist.
And then remember that potential pattern. The investigators found more evidence of that too.
On her phone.
Yep. Another text thread, this time between Rogers and a friend, where Rogers is describing a previous sexual relationship.
With who?
Another male subordinate from HEB, who was also 17 at the time and also a student in the same school district.
Wow. Okay, so that establishes the pattern. That's huge for prosecutors.
Yeah.
They call it building a modus operandi, or MO.
Right.
It makes it much, much harder for a defendant to argue the current charge is just some isolated mistake or misunderstanding. It shows a consistent behavior.
So how did the school Rouse High react?
They acted fast. The principal sent out a letter, emphasizing student safety, making it clear the alleged misconduct didn't happen at school or during school hours.
Trying to distance the school itself.
Understandably. But, and this is a crucial context, even though she was just a student teacher and the acts weren't on campus, she is still absolutely considered to be in a position of authority over students.
That power dynamic is key.
It's paramount. And Rogers wasn't ignorant of the rules. She'd gone through the district's compliance training. She'd reviewed the staff handbook. Those explicitly forbid these kinds of relationships. Her temporary role, the fact she got a stipend, none of that negates her position of authority.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. When these stories involve female teachers, the way they're portrayed in the media can be, well, sometimes sensationalized, almost romanticized sometimes.
That definitely happens, and it can really cloud the issue, obscuring the fact that this is abuse.
So how common is this, female educators as perpetrators?
Well, the statistics might surprise you. One U.S. study found women were responsible for about 19% of child sexual abuse committed by someone in a position of trust.
Nearly 1 in 5?
Yeah. And an international review put the number of female sex offenders at about 1 in 9. Official crime stats tend to show lower numbers, but these studies suggest it's more prevalent than the common stereotype allows.
And it's interesting, the research suggests many female perpetrators don't really fit that predatory mold we often think of.
Right. It's not always that they specifically seek out jobs like teaching to get access to kids. Often, the research points towards other factors, like maybe their own unmet intimacy needs, problems in their own relationships, loneliness.
So it stems from their own issues, potentially?
Potentially, yes. It's
Yeah.
complex and tied into this is how society tends to view women, as nurturers, the fairer sex.
Which can lead to minimizing the abuse.
Exactly. Sometimes people perceive abuse by a woman as less harmful, or maybe they think she must be mentally unstable or that she was somehow coerced by the male student.
Which completely downplays the impact on the victim.
Absolutely. It makes it harder for victims, especially male victims, to come forward or be believed. They might feel like their experience wasn't real abuse.
But legally speaking, none of that perception matters.
Not at all. Legally, this is abuse. It's sexual violence. It has serious criminal consequences, even if the victim is technically over the age of consent in that state. The power dynamic is the key legal factor.
And so often now, it's sexting, sending explicit messages or photos that brings these things into the open. Let's talk about that. Just how common is sexting these days?
It's incredibly common, way more than many people probably realize. A major poll found a third of all Americans surveyed admitted they'd sent an intimate photo at some point.
A third. Wow.
Yeah. And it definitely increases with age through young adulthood. Estimates show maybe 20% or more of young adults, say 18 to 26, have sent them. And nearly half, 46% of those aged 20 to 26, say they've received one.
So it's really mainstream behavior for that age group.
Very much so. And it's not usually a one-time thing. For people who do send them, over half said they do it at least once a week.
Okay, so why are people doing it? What are the motivations?
And sorts of reasons come up in surveys. Long-distance relationships is the big one. Being asked by a partner, sometimes it's about feeling attractive, boosting confidence, or sometimes people just say they felt like it.
And for teenagers.
Similar themes, but maybe more focused on fun, flirting, sending a sexy present, or just trying to get attention. Often driven by peer dynamics too.
And who are these images going to? Is it just partners?
Mostly current partners, yeah. But also crushes, good friends, and sometimes, worryingly, people they only know online or people they just met.
That sounds risky, spreading it wider like that.
Definitely increases the risk.
Yeah.
Because the more people have it, the higher the chance it gets out.
Which leads to the anxiety around it. People are worried, right?
Oh, absolutely. The data shows 4 out of 5 Americans worry their intimate pictures could end up in the wrong hands. And almost 70% worry those images might be used against them somehow later on.
There's a clear awareness of the danger then.
There is. But here's the really stark number. Despite that worry, Nearly three-quarters, 75% of people who admitted to sharing intimate photos later found out they'd been leaked or shared without their permission.
75%, that's huge.
It's a massive number. And it leads to real harm. Things like virtual slander, where maybe an ex deliberately shares private images to hurt someone's reputation, or even sextortion, using the images for blackmail.
People trying to protect themselves, though, right? Like hiding faces or using apps like Snapchat where messages disappear.
They do try.
Yeah.
But the reality is those measures often provide a false sense of security. Faces can sometimes be identified anyway. And disappearing messages, easily defeated by taking a screenshot or using screen recording.
So once it's sent, you've kind of lost control.
Pretty much. The digital permanence is hard to escape.
Okay, so let's get into the legal side more deeply. It's really important to understand sexting between two consenting adults, generally legal.
Right. But the moment consent is violated, like sharing without permission, or crucially, the moment a minor is involved, the whole legal picture changes. It becomes extremely strict.
Can you give us an example, maybe using Texas law, since we discussed the Rogers case?
Sure. Texas is a good example because it shows the nuance. The basic age of consent for physical acts is 17 there.
Okay.
But the laws around sexting, sending, or possessing explicit images are separate and much stricter, especially with minors. So that 17-year-old student sending images to the 22-year-old teacher, Darian Rogers, that could potentially be an offense for both of them under certain specific image laws.
Even for the 17-year-old?
Potentially, depending on the exact image and statute. Now, Texas does have a Romeo and Juliet exception. It's designed to protect teenagers who are close in age and in a dating relationship from facing harsh charges for, typical teenage behavior.
Right, makes sense.
But, and this is critical, that exception is narrow. It absolutely does not cover adults receiving images from minors or situations with significant age gaps, like the teacher-student scenario.
Yeah.
That distinction is vital.
And then there are the even tougher laws, right? The child pornography statutes.
Exactly. Like the Texas law, Penal Code Section 43.26. That applies to anyone, no age limits, no exceptions, who knowingly possesses or even just accesses visual material showing a child, anyone under 18, engaged in sexual conduct.
And it doesn't matter if the child consented or sent it willingly.
It doesn't matter one bit. The law takes a zero-tolerance stance on the possession or distribution of such images involving minors. Period.
Can you give another state example just for comparison?
Yeah, look at New York. They have a specific felony for adults called unlawful dissemination or publication of an intimate image. That usually requires proving intent to cause harm and lack of consent for the sharing.
Okay, so that's adult-to-adult revenge porn, basically.
Essentially. But when minors are involved, New York, like Texas, has much more severe child pornography and obscenity laws. Possessing or sharing images of a minor engaged in sexual conduct, even a selfie they took themselves, that can carry sentences of up to 7 or even 15 years in prison.
So the penalties ramp up hugely when kids are involved.
Massively. However, New York does do something interesting for teens themselves who get caught up in sexting. They have a diversion program. If the kids involved are under 20 and close in age, they might get offered an educational program instead of facing criminal prosecution right away.
Trying to educate rather than just punish teenagers.
Exactly. But that leniency does not extend to adults involved with minors. For adults convicted of these offenses, especially involving kids, registration as a sex offender is often mandatory.
And that's lifelong, isn't it?
It typically is. It's not just a sentence you serve, it's a status that follows you forever, impacting almost everything.
Which brings us to what you called collateral consequences. These aren't just about prison time.
Not at all. And frankly, for many people, these consequences are just as devastating, if not more so, than the prison sentence itself.
What kind of things are we talking about?
It's a long, grim list.
Mm-hmm.
Huge problems finding a job, or even keeping one if you have it. Difficulty renting an apartment or house, losing the right to vote or own a firearm,
right.
Potential immigration issues if you're not a citizen, major problems with child custody battles, and then specifically for professions like teaching, mandatory sex offender registration, which we mentioned, and the almost certain suspension or permanent loss of your professional license. Teaching, nursing, law, many licensed professions become impossible.
So thinking back to Darian Rogers, the student teacher in Texas, even if she avoided a long prison sentence, these consequences...
they're almost certainly career-ending for her. Before her career even really started, schools do thorough background checks. Public trust is everything in education. A conviction like this, especially involving a student. It's essentially a professional death sentence.
That's incredibly stark.
It is. And it helps explain why most of these cases actually end in plea bargains, not full trials.
Why is that?
Trials are risky for both sides. They're expensive, they take a long time, and they're incredibly stressful, especially for the victim who has to testify.
Right.
So often the prosecution offers a deal. Plead guilty to a lesser charge, maybe get a shorter sentence. But, and this is key, a plea bargain still usually involves admitting guilt to something.
Meaning those collateral consequences still kick in?
Exactly. The job loss, the registration, the housing issues, all of that likely still applies even with a plea deal. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card for the long-term impact. It also avoids the difficulty for prosecutors if a victim is maybe hesitant or unwilling to go through the trauma of a public trial.
Okay. So we've covered a lot today. A real deep dive into these disturbing cases, the role of digital evidence, the motivations.
Yeah, and the surprising frequency of things like sexting, contrasted with the very serious legal lines, especially around minors, lines that, when crossed, have these massive, life-altering consequences.
It really comes back to that power imbalance, doesn't it, between any educator and a student?
Oh, absolutely. Regardless of the specific title teacher, coach, student teacher, that imbalance is fundamental. And digital evidence, it's just changed the game in how these breaches of trust are exposed and prosecuted. That digital trail makes denial so much harder.
So, as we wrap up, something for you, our listener, to think about. In this world where sharing intimate moments digitally is so easy, so common, how do you personally balance that desire for connection, for self-expression, against the risks, the vulnerabilities involved in sharing those parts of yourself online?
It's a tough balance.
What boundaries will you set for yourself in this hyper-connected world, especially when interacting with people who might be in positions of trust over others or who might themselves be vulnerable, something to reflect on?